Well, it looks like we got a critical mass of participants, so we'll get going. Um, Delightful to have a great group on this call. I think there are about 21 people now. So I think it would be really, we got small enough group. I think it would be great to do quick introductions, just your name and your organization and your role in the organization, and then we'll get started. I'll start. I'm John Cleveland. I serve as a strategic advisor to the Boston Green Ribbon Commission. It's a CEO network that's supporting the implementation of the City of Boston's Climate Action Plan. We've been at it since 2010, and I work in partnership with my colleague Azanta Thakur, who probably many of you have traded emails with. So I'll Azanta. There's Azanta. Great. I'll move it over. Dennis.
Dennis Carlberg, Associate Vice President for Sustainability at Boston University.
Great.
And I also co-chair the Higher Ed Working Group with Jacob Glickel from Northeastern.
And Stephen, we'll be hearing more from Stephen soon.
Sure. Stephen Bloom, Assistant Vice President, Government Relations, the American Council on Education.
And Carter, who will also be hearing from more soon.
Hi, folks. Thanks for inviting me down the 95 corridor. I'm Carter Strickland, Chief Sustainability Officer for the State University of New York, and you'll hear more from me later.
Great. Jeff Cullen.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jeff Kahn. I'm the Director of Federal Relations, also from the State University of New York. I'm based here in Washington, D.C.
Great. And Corinne? You're on mute, Corinne, if you want to say something. Okay, we'll move on. Tori?
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. I'm Tori Spies. I'm the Senior Sustainability Strategist at Northeastern University.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Amy?
Good morning. Well, it's morning, at least where I am. I'm in Mountain Time in Boise, Idaho. I'm the Sustainability Director at Boise State University.
Great. Welcome. I'd like to have the West Coast here. Jennifer Wilson?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wilson. I'm the Director of Programming and Advocacy with New England Museum Association.
Great. Delightful. Luke from Bowdoin. Okay, I think some folks are on mute and maybe not listening. So Steve Lanou, a friendly, familiar face.
Hi, everybody. Steve Lanou with MIT's Office of Sustainability here in Cambridge, Mass.
Great. And Travis?
Hi, Travis Mull, work with GRC's PR team.
Great. And Kaisha Payson?
Yes, Keisha Payson, Director of Sustainability at Bowdoin College. And Luke, who we didn't hear from before, he's our campus decarbonization project manager.
Oh, terrific. Thanks. And Kate? Okay, I'll keep moving. Chris Gassman?
Hey all, Chris Gassman, the Senior Associate Director over at the Center for Sustainable Business here in Pittsburgh, at University of Pittsburgh.
Great. And Jana?
Hi, I'm Jana Cohen-Rosenthal. I'm the Sustainability and Resiliency Planner at UMass Boston.
Great to have you here, Jana. And Jess? Okay, I'll keep moving. Isabella?
Hi, everyone. I'm Isabella Gamble, Assistant Director of Climate, Energy, and Resilience at A Better City here in Boston. We also staff the Commercial Real Estate Working Group of the Green Ribbon Commission and have quite a few higher ed institutions as members. So it's wonderful to be here, and thank you all for your leadership.
Great. Thanks for being here. And Swarnav, great to see you on this dial.
Yeah, John, it's been a while. We'll have to catch up offline. Swarnav Pujari, Director of New Program Development at Power Options up here in Massachusetts. So calling in from beautiful Boston, Mass today.
Great. Jacob.
Hi, everyone. Jacob Glickle, Director of Sustainability Operations at Northeastern University.
Great. And Deborah Shepard.
Good morning, everyone. I am the principal and founder at Riverstone Sustainability. We're based in Newburyport, Mass, and I work extensively with Wentworth Institute as a contract sustainability officer, and also with several other universities across New England on lead building projects and climate action. So we have been digging deeply into the IRA incentives, and I look forward to chatting with all of you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for joining. Ellen Katz.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Fiscal Affairs and Energy Resources for the City of Cambridge Public Works Department. Happy to be here and learn from the higher ed institutions.
Great. Yeah, I should emphasize that while we focus this on higher ed, it's really relevant to any nonprofits that are taking advantage of the IRA.
Exactly.
So we welcome some other folks to come in. So Zach.
Hi, good morning. Zach Thompson. I am a Senior Engineering Manager at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston.
Great. Great to have you, Zach. And Brian Smith.
Morning, Brian Smith. I'm the Energy Manager for Boston Children's Hospital.
Okay, great. Anybody that I missed, you can just unmute and say hello. Okay. If not, we can jump into it. Azanta, you can open the slide deck.
Yeah, sure. And I think we did have just someone join. Mark, if you wanted to introduce yourself while I share the slides here.
Yeah, sure thing. Having a little bit of an issue with the my password and two-factor authentication, but Mark Scow, Elevated Design. I'm a mechanical engineer working with decarbonization.
Great. Great to have you. So this is the first meeting of the Higher Ed Working Group IRA Shared Knowledge Network. This came together as a result of a webinar that we co-sponsored with Second Nature, and a bunch of the institutions that are part of our Higher Ed Working Group said it would be really useful to have periodic times to check in and create a space for them to share best practices on how they are or are not able to leverage the resources of the IRA to support their campus sustainability and climate action plans. As Dennis noted, our Higher Ed Working Group is co-chaired by himself, Dennis Carberg, and also Jacob Gleichel from Northeastern. I'm going to turn it over to Dennis for a second, just to say a little bit about the network and its background, sort of how it's going to operate. So Azanta, I think you could probably take this slide off for the time being.
Thanks, John. It's great to see so many people interested in this. I feel like the IRA is a real opportunity for us to work on decarbonizing our operations. We all know that the IRA is the largest climate investment in U.S. history, but it is also incredibly complicated. So pulling everybody together here, I think will help us all get through this daunting process to access this opportunity. Taking advantage of these resources will require organizations to proactively adjust their planning, investment, and procurement processes and align so that we can align with the IRA requirements, and I think really figure out how to integrate this into our existing processes. So what we've done here is we've organized a knowledge sharing network, and we may be able to leverage this beyond, as we were talking a little bit before everybody got on, in working with Second Nature. Hopefully we can broaden this group significantly. We see this, however, as an informal network with really member-led initiative. We expect to meet roughly quarterly for 60 to 90 minutes each time we get together. We plan on focusing on topics that are of particular interest to members. So we're going to be looking for suggestions here. As we are today, really bringing in outside experts where appropriate. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And I'll turn it back over to John.
Great. Thanks. Azanta, can you pop up the slide, the presenter slide? So as we noted in the materials we sent you, there are lots of parts of the IRA. This event, if you go to the next one, Azanta, this event is specifically focused on the elective pay provisions, and it was what we heard from you as participants that is sort of the part of the IRA you were most interested in hearing about. So we got two great panelists who are going to be presenting to us. The first, just sequentially in time, is going to be Stephen Bloom. He's Assistant Vice President of Government Relations at the American Council on Education, the major coordinating body for the nation's colleges and universities. And he leads their legislative and regulatory advocacy before Congress, the White House, and executive agencies on a bunch of policy issues, but in particular on taxation and climate change. So I think he's the right person to help us understand, sort of do a level setting of the elective pay provisions in the IRA, where Treasury and the IRS are at on it, and start to stimulate our thinking about how institutions will need to organize to take advantage of these opportunities. The second speaker is Carter Strickland. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Executive Director for Climate Action for the State University of New York, which has 64 campuses and educates 1.3 million students. So it's a pretty, as we know, a pretty large system. Previously, he served as the New York State Director for the Trust for Public Land, and also served as the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where he oversaw the largest municipal-owned water utility in the country. So we're delighted to have Carter here. He is supporting SUNY in sort of how they are preparing to work to integrate the IRA elective pay operations, as Dennis said, you know, into their facilities planning, their capital planning, their procurement, and other core processes. He's not claiming to have figured it out. He wanted to be sure that that was communicated at the front end. And what he's really going to do is help us sort of raise issues so that he can say, like, okay, as we're thinking this through here in SUNY, here are the things that we're needing to worry about, and here are some of the things we think we figured out and not figured out. So following the presenters, hopefully we'll have, like, 20 minutes to 30 minutes for not just Q&A and discussion, but I think also any sharing that you want to do about where your institution is at on these processes that might be valuable to others. If you do have questions that occurred during the presentations, put them in the chat box, not the Q&A box, but in the chat box. And Azanta and I will draw from the chat box to pull them up and highlight them. And alternatively, when we get into the discussion period, you'll all be, on tile, and just use the raise hand feature, and we'll let you say what you want to say. We are recording this session, and then shortly after we get done, you'll get an email that has a link to the recording and also a link to the materials that were presented. And last but not least, of course, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, who's going to lead us through sort of the intro section on elective pay in the IRA. Stephen?
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Azanta, for queuing up my slides. Just even before we start to get in, thank you for inviting me to participate in this. I'm an old, deep connection to Boston. Met my wife at Northeastern Law School. We had a dog many years named Fenway, so that tells you what my sports loyalties are. And all of our 3 children were born in Boston, so in some of the great hospitals there. So so pleased to be able to be here with you. So just as a little, John gave you a brief overview of what ACE is, as the sort of the convening umbrella org for higher ed. As he noted, that among my array of issues in my portfolio as a lobbyist here in Washington, D.C. in this rainy day here, tax issues. That's been the core of my portfolio for 16 years while I've been here at ACE. And only recently, and I'll get to it in a minute as we go through, obviously the IRA isn't that old. And so, there are a number of tax provisions we're going to talk about, and that's really what brought me into it. And we're really in the early stages here at ACE of building our sustainability work. And my goal here today really is to try and just give you an overview and some resources that you can use and to help stimulate this conversation. So why don't we go to the next slide? So that's just an overview of what I'm going to cover, just a brief introduction about what the IRA is. We'll talk about the elective pay or direct pay provisions, applicable tax credits, sort of the examples of potential projects you can use with the tax credits to fund, the bonus provisions. There are an array of bonus provisions. And then I think most importantly, a bunch of resources, some from Treasury. And then there's a link to a webinar that we did a week or two ago with Treasury and the Department of Education on the IRA and the slides that were used, as well as the University of California a senior climate official there talking about how the UC system is utilizing the IRA and the direct pay provisions in particular, or provision 6417. Anyway, go ahead. So just very briefly, high overview, the IRA is the largest investment in climate in U.S. history, about $370 billion in climate and energy provisions, an estimated 40% up to 40% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. Most of it is delivered by these tax incentives we're going to talk about. The primary federal agency implementing the IRA tax provisions is Treasury and the IRS, but the IRS is part of Treasury. And the tax incentives really cover a broad range of activities and support building a clean energy economy using these tax credits and the bonuses that we're going to talk about. Go ahead. So the first big piece, and I know it's really what we want to spend a lot of time talking about today, is elective or direct pay. And typically, won't surprise you, I know that we have both institutions of higher education here as well as governmental entities from Cambridge and hospitals that are private tax exempt institutions. Typically, tax exempt organizations, whether they're government entities or institutions of higher education or others similar, we don't pay income tax. And so we wouldn't benefit generally from, tax provisions that would lower our income tax obligations. And so what was done here in the IRA was to create a mechanism that's really modeled on refundable tax credits. I don't know if any of you are familiar with refundable tax credits for low-income individuals. There are an array of them in the tax code. In the higher ed space, the American Opportunity Tax Credit is partially refundable. Basically, that just means that for people who don't have any tax liability, like in the case of individuals, low-income individuals, they can use a refundable tax credit to get support from the government. It's rather than a direct funding program, it's the spending is through the tax code, and that's the way this mechanism works here too for tax exempt organizations, whether they're governmental, in the case of public universities, or the Cambridge Public Works official that we have here, or private nonprofit institutions, whether higher ed, college and universities, or hospitals. And it's really the first time that tax exempt and governmental entities are going to be able to use this kind of mechanism, which is, as I noted, really has been used previously for individual taxpayers, but it hasn't been used, as far as I'm aware of, certainly not in the climate space, to incentivize investments to address climate change. It's not a competitive grant program. They're not loan programs. They are, available to all institutions of higher education and others that I just mentioned, as long as you are an eligible institution, and all of the folks on here today would be eligible, and that you're eligible for to use the underlying tax credit for the purpose that it's directed for a particular kind of investment. And you'll see I've included some links here along the way, and you'll get to keep these slides and you can obviously access them. That's a link to a White House page that I thought might be helpful. Okay, next slide, please. The final regulations, in preparing for this, we talked about sort of what might be helpful to you all. There were a couple, the draft regulations were issued a couple of years ago. I think I don't remember the exact date, following the enactment of the IRA in August of 2022. There weren't huge changes in between the proposed regulations and the final regulations. The key piece for all of us here today, and this was actually in the proposed regulations, and it was confirmed and finalized in the final regulations that were issued a couple of weeks ago, is that all private, nonprofit, public colleges and universities, even those that are defined as instrumentalities, are eligible to use the elective pay mechanism. That particular issue of instrumentalities, that was something I worked on here with colleagues and institutions, some members of ACE, and we got a great result. It really was a drafting error in the IRA, but Treasury clarified that public universities that are even defined as instrumentalities, they are eligible to use the elective pay mechanism. The other couple pieces is that the final regs really prevent eligible entities from sort of gaming the system and getting an excess benefit, where they would combine grants and forgivable loans with tax credits to get more than they might be eligible for. Just by using the tax credits, you can combine those things, but you can't get more than what you would be eligible for under the tax credit. So basically, it's set up so that you can get the maximum available under the tax credit. And if you've got other sources of revenue like grants or forgivable loans, those would have to be subtracted, and that's what you would end up getting under the tax credit. The other thing is you can't chain an election of credits under 6417. That's the direct pay section in the statute. With other sources, the 6418, that's the transfer of credits. Transferability doesn't apply to tax exempt entities like those on the call today. Transferability is just basically a mechanism where you can sell your access to these tax credits if you're eligible, but you're not eligible for direct pay. You can sell them to a third party, and they can then use the tax credits. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through quickly on these two. This is just the array of tax credits that are available. There are two slides here. Not going to talk too much in detail about them. They cover a lot of different kinds of investments. I've included a link to where you can find this page in the IRS. The next page, 2. So you get a sense of the breadth. There are, I think, 12 tax credits that are eligible to be used in the elective pay or direct pay mechanism. Next slide, please. So you all, particularly the institutions of higher education that are on the call here, we have significant physical infrastructure, transportation systems. We have lots of vehicles, and the direct pay mechanism is really going to allow colleges and universities to advance their campus climate and sustainability efforts by defraying up to 50 to 60% of the installation costs for these technologies. They're available until 2032. They are non-competitive, so it's not like competing for a grant. Anybody who's an eligible institution and you're using the tax credit for basically an eligible technology, you can use them. They're uncapped, so that means that it's an unlimited number of institutions can participate. The other thing you may be able to do is to combine the tax credits with enhanced Section 179D energy efficiency tax deduction when you're building or retrofitting on campus building with energy efficient technologies. Next slide, please. And the kinds of projects you can use the tax credits for. This won't come as a big surprise, I suppose, to all of you. Solar farms, wind farms, battery storage, ground source heat pumps, geothermal. I know there was an article a couple of months ago with this year, I guess in 24, Princeton using doing a huge geothermal project on campus. My alma mater, Oberlin College, did a huge geothermal project there too that they're wrapping up. So these are the kinds of examples of the sorts of projects you can use the tax credits for and the direct pay function. Next slide. The other key piece that you should know about is there are bonuses. So you take the base credit, which is 6%, and then you add these bonuses on top of that. So with the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, if you meet prevailing wage, you can multiply that 6% times 5. So you get up to 30% of the value of what you're using the tax credit to offset. And then there are other bonuses, the domestic content. So it's a made in America content requirements that's for the production tax credit or the investment tax credit. In both cases, that can be 10% or up to 10% in the case of the ITC. So that would be added on top of that 30%. And then you can, if you're building or investing in an energy community, those are historical, sort of energy communities. I don't know how many there are in the Boston area. I don't think you have too many closed coal mines or maybe some coal-fired power plants, who knows? So that would be another 10% on top of that. And then if you're for wind and solar investments in low-income communities, then you can potentially add another 10 to 20% on top of the other, the base credit plus the other bonuses. So you see how it gets to 50 to 60% that I mentioned in the prior slide. Next slide. So just to wrap up, here's a set of resources. The first one is the link to the webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago that also has slides from both the Treasury official and the University of California. The one slide that I think would be most useful to you from the Treasury official is he has a page on how to claim the effective credits, the elective credits, and you can see that. I think it's on page 15 of those slides, so that might be useful. And then there are other IRS or White House links here that with information and that hopefully will be helpful to you in thinking about and using these credits. I know that it's going to be an unusual thing for all of you because you probably don't use the tax code very often. You're not that familiar with it. And when we were doing the webinar a couple of weeks ago, the Treasury official really talked about who should be in the room. Obviously, the climate officials, the kind of people are on this call, but then others on campus, like your CFOs, your tax experts, your infrastructure, your campus infrastructure folks. It's going to take sort of a team because I can imagine you're not all that familiar with utilizing the tax code and the way that the IRA builds it out so that you can do that. So I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Asanta or John.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. That's a great overview. And again, you will be getting a copy of all of the slide materials right after the presentation, so you can dive into the detail. Just a reminder, if you have specific questions that you want to ask, either Stephen or Carter that occur to you while they're speaking, just pop them into the chat. When we get done, we'll all be back on tiles, and you can also just use the raise your hand function to ask a question. I'll turn it over to Carter. It's all yours, Carter.
Thank you, John. Good to talk to everyone. I'll note that the Green Ribbon Commission seems very similar to an organization that I participate in quite extensively in the New York metro area, the Regional Plan Association. I congratulate you for getting organized and bringing the civic and business communities together. As John mentioned, I have a municipal background, and it's relevant, I think, for a few reasons. One, New York City, maybe like a lot of cities, had capital planning efforts or structures that are somewhat different from the states, and that's something I'm getting used to in my 10th month on the job. I'll also note that there's a connection, I think, with cities, and that many of our institutions are essentially small cities, and I think it's good that you get together. Asanta, you can advance the slide. Thank you. Just an overview, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I put a lot of text in these slides, more than I like to usually, but I knew that they were going to be circulated afterwards, so I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. But just so you get, I think we're not first out of the box. I think California's done it, quite a bit with IRA. No one's an expert, but they've done quite a bit. But we do have some scale, and as John mentioned, we have 64 campuses. 30 of those are community colleges, which are a joint project with counties. And so here you have the state operated campuses, and you can see our geographic spread. I think for purposes of this and our building energy use, we have about 90 million square feet, all told, if you take out the community colleges, and the buildings are old, 50 years average. So it's important, as you look to the next slide. Thank you. All this is happening against the backdrop, no surprise to anyone here, of pretty extensive good repair needs. Immediate renewal, we're saying, is 8.6 billion. There's some opportunities here as you look at the big wedges for HVAC and envelope, for example, and you want to take advantage of that as best we can. Next slide, please. Just to give a sense of what we're budgeting against, hopefully, or need to accommodate. We still use a lot of gas, and we want to move that all to electricity, essentially, not to mention everything else. But electricity is not cheap on a per BTU, and it's getting more expensive, actually, and there's constraints in the system. So those are all background facts that we have to accommodate, mostly through scheduling, but also through costs. And you can see, the budget we're looking at is about $250 or so million a year. Next slide, please. So, New York has some very aggressive state. We're a state entity, SUNY, and are subject to, what other state agencies are subject to. Economy-wide in New York, we have very ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gases 40% compared to 1990 levels by 2030, which is tomorrow, and then 85 from a capital planning point of view, and then 85% reduction by 2050. A lot of that is pegged to cleaning up the grid and electrifying buildings, with offshore wind energy, which has been a little slow to roll out. Next slide, please. In addition, there's a governor's executive order that now requires state agencies to lead by example. That's the subtitle of that executive order, and including some ambitious energy reduction goals, fleet changeover to electric vehicle goals, waste reduction goals, and the like. Next slide, please. We've done a bit already, and I think it's relevant for a few reasons. One of which is that no good deed goes unpunished. So a lot of low-hanging fruit has been picked already. In terms of energy reduction, we're pretty far along towards the interim goal of 40% reduction by 2030, and that's through a combination of really efficiency work in our new buildings that come online. We have an internal building standard, actually, on top of LEED Silver standard, which we're revisiting this year, but we don't use fossil fuels where we subject to very limited exceptions in new buildings. And there's some other things we do, deep energy retrofits, and we have some renewable energy we want to build more of. Looking forward to the future, we have completed clean energy master plans, which are really decarbonization plans to hit that 85 by 50 goal for all 29 state operated campuses, plus a few extras, actually. And essentially, the strategy, while varies per campus, looks at widespread adoption of geothermal heat pumps, thermal energy networks, sometimes in connection with our utility in a broader utility thermal energy network and building electrification. The number is we're scrubbing the number, but it's going to be in the tens of billions. And needless to say, it's going to take a decade or probably two to get to. That's on top of our state of good repair and needs, and also clean energy needs at 5 statutory colleges and 30 community colleges. So it's a big number. Next slide, please. Just in the near term, we have over $1 billion in shovel-ready projects, which I think is important, given the political and other funding categories. The key challenge that we're trying to address now while we get smart on IRA is identifying the upfront funding. As Steve mentioned, it's a reimbursement program. So we have to fund this, all our work up front. And we also have to navigate debt caps and limits and restrictions. So we can't just borrow it all and then pay it back later, which would be, one solution to all of this. So we're really, to date, looking at annual appropriations for our regular capital plan, somewhere between, 500 million and $1 billion. The current budget is getting hammered out as we speak and will be done in a week or two. We did get last year some earmarked projects for, a chiller project that was really critical. So $30 million last year. We're hoping for 90 million this year. On top of that, there is a New York Bond Act that was passed by voters in late 2022 on election day. And there's $100 million there for SUNY. And then we start to look at federal grant programs, for example, state funding programs. Some of that is federal money, but some of that is just state money through a system benefit charge, utility demand funding, private funding through PPAs and ESCOs. The ESCO is rather undeveloped, and we want to revive that. And then on to IRA, what we're talking about today. And so this obviously, to the extent we can count on the money, that will factor into our economic decisions now, but we have to understand how predictable it is. And so we're getting on board a consultant. I can't tell you who, but once they're under contract, hopefully in the next few months, we have some questions. And also for our governor's office and our colleagues in state government under Division of Budget. Those include, for example, how predictable are these? Can we build these into our capital planning decisions now? What's the discount going to look like for tax-free bonds, which is basically how we pay for most everything, at least the funding we get through our base capital plan and Bond Act and things like that. If it's geothermal, paying for the wells is one thing. Paying for distribution, building piping, electrical panel upgrades, which all, I think, meet the but-for test. We wouldn't be doing it but for geothermal project. How much of that can we capture? Because that obviously is a big difference. Are maybe like other public universities, are the underlying owner is the state of New York. And the underlying owner is who gets the reimbursement. So we have an internal discussion about whether that goes into the general state treasury or whether we can in fact create a SUNY Clean Energy Revolving Fund so that we can start to meet those needs going forward. and keep that revolving fund going, which has been very successful in the state revolving fund. If you're familiar with how water funding works, to keep it going. We probably, like a lot of schools in the Northeast, are prevailing wage is not a concern. We already have other obligations separate apart from that and values to meet and exceed those numbers. Apprenticeship is something new though, and if we don't meet both, as Steve mentioned, if you don't meet both prevailing wage and apprenticeship, you're really looking at 6%, not 30%. That's a big difference. So we need to develop a statewide apprenticeship strategy to get that going. And again, like a lot of states with across the country, there's a labor shortage, so it's not so easy to get union labor or apprenticeships. And then finally, one thing that's the 179D credit for efficiency has been around for a while. It's quirky for those of you who know it in that it goes to the designer. It doesn't go to the owner. And I think that the thinking at the time was that designers were going to push the envelope and kind of sell things to the owner. I think that's a little misguided, in my opinion. The owners make the ultimate decisions about what they're going to do and should be rewarded for that. Nonetheless, we're stuck with that structure. So I think, some states like Texas has developed a contract strategy they essentially negotiate with the designers or build into the contract, and maybe we can do that as well. But we need to develop that contract strategy to capture those 179D credits, which can be pretty extensive. I think that's my last slide, but you can advance the slide and just go to the, yep. There's some historical stuff there that you can study later. I think that maybe the takeaway for that slide is that energy, yeah, thank you. Electricity use has dipped and then is going back up. And if you look, to the future, it's going to soar. So that's what we're looking at. But that's what I have for everyone today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carter. Great to see the perspective from a big system like yours. So I'm gonna kick the Q&A off with a sort of a general question, I think, both to Stephen and Carter. So as you think about this, can you just say something about what does the strategic planning process for IRA utilization look like? And the second sort of sub question of it that Stephen touched on is, like, who are the key stakeholders that you need to bring together to put this plan together and to make it happen? And it sounds like it's a set of players that aren't historically or operating in close proximity with each other. So could both of you just give a quick impression about that, and then we'll move on to the questions in the chat box.
I mean, sure. For us, it's really the governor's office and division of budget, which controls some of those capital flows. As I mentioned, standing up a clean energy revolving facility, is critical to us. And we need to know in advance if we're going to get the money or if it's going to the state, and then the state will make us whole. But, if we're going to, even before we invest in efforts around the registration and the filing of taxes, all of which is new, that's a different calculus that the money's not going to come to us. So that's, an internal conversation probably that a lot of states are having, and other folks.
It's great. Stephen, any ideas?
So yeah, I would just add, as I sort of said, I mean, I think, the tax code is going to be, apart from you having to pay your own individual taxes, you may not be familiar with it much as, within your institution. So you need to get in the room, your tax people, and, these are all the institutions, certainly the institutions of higher education on the call. And I'm sure the hospitals, you're going to have dedicated tax people, and your general counsel or somebody from your general counsel's office, your CFO, right? And then your infrastructure people. And the other thing I would say to you is, I'm sure you're eager to get going. I would say you really should get going, because the way the IRA was enacted, without going into great detail about it, Republicans have said that if they take power, and this is not a partisan comment, I'm just telling you the facts as I understand it as a lobbyist, if they take power, they will seek to repeal the IRA, these provisions in the IRA. So, you know, I would get moving as you know, with alacrity.
Well, can I mention that the timing issue, Steve, that's a good maybe setup, Stephen, for, I mean, there has been a timing issue that was somewhat resolved. So for a lot of SUNY, maybe like a lot of municipalities and other nonprofits, is on a not on a calendar tax year, and taxes are kind of irrelevant. We do, you know, 990T and 1098s for our students, but so we do file, but our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. And, you know, there was an issue about like what happens, and the direct pay provisions, you know, went in fact for the tax year, as they said, following the enactment, which was late 2022. So that meant that the geothermal projects we built in like the first 6 months of calendar year 2023 were not going to be eligible. And there's been a fix on that, that we have to figure out how that works. And you know, it's quite technical, but even for those projects, we, or for projects that were done in like, say, late the second half of calendar 23, so it's in our current tax year, which operates until through June 30th. We always file a 6-month extension, apparently, and so we're going to be filing taxes on those in May 25, and who knows how long it's going to take to turn around the money. So we're looking at, you know, a year and a half or two wait, and I think that's fairly typical. So again, just reinforcing the need for some facility to provide upfront funding.
That's great. That's a great point. Dennis had a question specific to geothermal, which is like what parts of a geothermal project would get covered? Is it just the bores, the whole system, the heat pumps, the chill beams? Is there anything that the two of you know about that can answer that question? And anybody else on the call too could be great.
Yeah, I would say that's a great uncertainty. That's one of the uncertainties. I know the University of Oregon sent a letter to Treasury asking basically that kind of those sets of questions. I know the University of California, they have similar kinds of questions. So I mean, I think, you know, if that's a question that you all have, you know, I can you know, help to be a conduit to Treasury to get that submitted. Because I do think that's uncertain.
Still, okay.
Swarnev, I see you have your hand up, so if you unmute, you can jump in, and then we'll go to Deborah.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys. That was really helpful. One question in regards to 179D. I hear there are some third-party shops akin to how tax equity shops exist. Are you guys familiar with any well-established 179D shops? Because it doesn't seem like a lot of the energy efficiency contractors are necessarily, as you guys mentioned, pushing these this specific incentive onto building owners. A, are you guys familiar with them? Any specific names to look out for? And B, the other aspect of this, 179D requires a 25% minimum reduction in your energy use intensity. Are you guys seeing buildings actually hitting those with, you know, heat pump geothermal or air source building envelopes? I think we can retroactively go up back 4 years of projects, depending on the year that you file, but getting to that peak of like a 50% so you can claim that $5 a square foot incentive seems ambitious to say the least. But not sure if you guys have seen anything that would calm that concern that I'm seeing, at least in the incentive.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Well, I mean, first of all, New York has really left those 179D incentives on the table, so to speak. I mean, we are occasionally asked to provide a support letter for the architects to get it. you know, and those, that's been sort of the folks who have hired, you know, many of these um, intermediaries and, you know, experts to either file for them or loan them funding against it. So I think it's an issue we need to look at. On regarding thresholds, it's certainly ambitious, as I mentioned, you know, maybe especially in our case or in many folks' case where a lot of the efficiency sort of savings have been taken back. I think the look back was 3 years, but 4 years is interesting. You know, nonetheless, you know, unless you have a contract in place where you can get it, you know, I don't know that it's going to benefit, you know, owners too much. We did hit on average, and so we had an executive order requiring us to do some energy efficiency work with an EUI goal of 20%, which we hit. And that's even before sort of the geothermal switchover age. So that was pure, you know, efficiency. And that was an average, even as we were increasing our, you know, building stock by like essentially 50%. So, you know, 25% probably is doable. 50% is it's going to be tough.
So it's fair to look at the incentive more as a, $1 to $2 a square foot, as opposed to the upper end of $5.
Yeah,
Unless
I mean,
it's
unless
a
you have,
massively old building.
I mean, there's some great, yeah. I think that's probably right. You know, and envelope, you know, to like passive house standard is going to be, you know, quite expensive. But that we know, you know, can hit 50%.
Okay. And do you happen to know any 179D shops? I know you kind of touched on how convincing the architect. No? Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Warren. Deborah, you got your hand up.
Yes, thanks. Just in response to the conversation so far. So I actually spoke to a company called Energy Tax Savers. So if you're looking for a firm that does 179, they do that. And they also presented on the Inflation Reduction Act for, I think, an Eversource event a couple months ago. So I gave them a ring the other day because we had a project looking at geothermal, and he had some interesting points about how equipment counts, and there were two key takeaways for me. And I don't know if this was from draft guidance, but he was saying that the geothermal has to supply at least 50% of the building's total energy use to even go after it. So we had been looking at systems that are like some somewhat smaller, some medium, some bigger, you know, for new construction to try to figure out what the sweet spot would be. So you have to keep that in mind. And then the other advice that he gave was, if the thermal energy from the geothermal system runs through a piece of equipment within the building, so it does actually go into the building. It's not just the board. I don't have the notes in front of me, but those were the key takeaways I got from that piece. And then in
Deborah,
terms of
can I ask you a question on that? Actually, I was going to type it,
Sure.
but it's probably of interest. 50% of the building's, you know, MMBTUs, like overall energy, or 50% of the heating.
I think it was overall energy, if I remember correctly. So, yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuance, and he told me that rule only applied for geothermal. It didn't apply to other types of technologies. So that was just like a unique thing that they set up for geothermal. And then I think the other piece for 179D, in terms of the targets, if you look at the rules, the way that they're written, you show improvement in performance compared to an ASHRAE baseline, and the ASHRAE baseline is actually pretty old. I want to say it's like 2007, at least for the next like year or two. So proving, you know, at least a 20% up to a 50% improvement might not be that hard right now. When they update that to, I think it's going to be like 2016 or something, it'll get much harder. So
Sounds like a lobbying issue for Stephen to make sure that there's an index there.
Yeah, we're building your lobbying agenda for you, Stephen. So, we expect results. Any other questions from the audience? Actually, there was one that got put in the Q&A, and that is to the reference of a potential change in administration. Is there any anxiety that there could be some kind of clawback provision that in fact would force the folks who'd already gotten these credits to actually repay them, or is that outside the bounds of what would be considered
I
possible?
don't know. It's possible, I suppose. I mean, it would be, you know, how difficult would that be to implement? Uh, you know, it's all to be determined. It's a risk. All I'm saying to you all is that it's a risk to be thinking about in your calculation. So, because the way that the IRA was enacted, it used an arcane Senate a process called reconciliation, only required 50 votes, 51 votes, and that would, I assume, that's what they would use to repeal it. So, you know, of course, you know, you have to have a Democratic House, and you have to have a Democratic, or I mean, a Republican House and a Republican president. So,
A last question, and then we'll bring it to an end, is, I thought the question that Carter was raising about the fact that this is a reimbursement and you have to come up with a cash in front, which is, you know, part of what the household energy efficiency incentives, you know, are about, and has always been criticized from an equity point of view, because basically people who are wealthy can put the money out front and get the efficiency credit, and those who can't put the cash out front don't get it. Any of the other institutions on the call thought about how you're going to manage that upfront cash issue, and are you going to put together some kind of? It does seem to be a logical venue for a revolving loan fund of some kind, where you front the cash, and then as you get the credits, it goes back into the loan fund. Anybody thought about how they're going to handle that upfront cash issue? Okay, Deborah, you get your hand up again.
Sorry. Yeah, we just had a call this morning for one of my clients that's looking at large scale solar, and the consultant for that project is, their recommended strategy is to do short-term financing just to cover the amount of the Inflation Reduction Act rebate. And then as soon as you get that back, you can take off the short-term.
So are they doing bank financing, you mean?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, cool, great. Well, I think we're on time. It's exactly 12 o'clock. Thank you for all joining us, and special thanks, Stephen and Carter, for bringing your experience into this fold. I think it's really, really useful. As we said, you'll be getting a link that will get you to the slides that the presenters used, as well as a recording of the session. And then we will start the process. I think the general idea has been that we'll manage, you know, sort of quarterly meetings of this network within the, you know, sort of Boston venue until we come together. We've been talking with Tim Carter at Second Nature, partnering with Tim, and Tim is thinking about maybe doing something on a national basis, which would be great, I think, for our Boston institutions to have more exposure to national organizations. So we'll see how that goes. So again, thank you very much for being with us, and hopefully see you next time. Take care.